from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only primetime TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English. And I'm Natalia Hromadske, and that's what we have prepared for you tonight. At the Munich Security Conference, President Petro Poroshenko urges Russia to cooperate with UN peacekeeping plans in the occupied Donbas. We discuss Ukrainian public attitudes 4 years after the Euromaidan revolution. The story of an activist beaten by the Ukrainian riot police during the Maidan, who became a member of the reformed riot police. Is Eurasia the future? We speak to Bruno Makayas about his new book, The Dawn of Eurasia. And we catch up with Dato Vanishvili, the man in South Ossetia separated from his Georgian homeland by a barbed wire fence. Officials from Germany, France, Ukraine and Russia have dropped their plans to hold a four-way meeting on the ceasefire violation in eastern Ukraine on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. Though Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs Pavlo Klimkin met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov and said that they haven't managed to agree on anything. At the same time, Ukraine's president delivered a speech on the Russian threat, and Richard Govan, an expert on the UN, presented at the conference a new report on what a potential UN peacekeeping mission in the Donbas would look like. That's it. And we are joined by Andreas Umland, a German analyst based in Ukraine, who is the research fellow at the Institute of Euro-Atlantic Cooperation, to discuss the issue and the development. So, Andreas, what new we have learned? I can't say there were much expectation, yet there were some from the recent security talks.
Well, I think these sort of conferences, they are usually not the fora for some sort of new idea. Sometimes that happens, by, like when Putin gave his infamous speech in 2007, I think, or 2007, I think it was. But at this conference, like in most of these conferences, there wasn't anything in substance new. There were some nuances. The main discussion was, as far as I gathered, about the relationship between NATO and the EU, how the EU would further develop, how the EU would develop in terms of defense, and how that would then relate to NATO. And also the Ukrainian problem was also discussed. And here the main topic, as you have already indicated, that is emerging now is whether it will be possible to get a mandate from the UN Security Council for a peacekeeping mission, for a substantive peacekeeping mission, not the proposal that Putin made last year about a small peacekeeping operation to basically protect the OSCE observers, but a real peacekeeping mission of several thousand peacekeepers, soldiers and police force, and we have now a new report on this from Rasmussen International.
Before we'll go to the report and to see the probability, we definitely should say to our audience that it is the case. It's seriously discussed. We know that the diplomats are working in the UN Security Council. The Ukrainian diplomats are working. So, you know, it's not just a wishful thinking. But before that, we would like to hear the quote from the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko.
Today and yesterday here in Munich, I never listening the words conflict on the east of Ukraine. Not anymore. We name it aggression of Russian Federation against sovereign and independent country. At the beginning of year 2015, immediately when we signed the second phase of the Minsk agreement, in Minsk exactly 4 years ago, I said that it is absolutely necessary to have a peacekeeping operation under the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. At that time, nobody believed in that. Everybody said that this is impossible. Why? Simply impossible. And today I'm proud to hear that all our partners, from Australia to Canada, from United States to the United Kingdom, in some European countries, it started to be the part of the coalition agreement. And I want to thank Germany for that. Question for the peacekeeping operation in Ukraine, which can bring the peace to my country. Because I'm a president of peace, I'm not a president of war. And we don't have an idea to win Russia. We just want that Russia take their troops back from their Ukrainian territory. We want that they tank all their tanks, multi-rocket launch system, state-of-the-art production of the Russian military technical complex, who specially produced to kill Ukraine. Our request very simple: stop killing Ukrainians. Take your troops back, take your tanks back, take your artillery system back. And we don't have any problem in Ukraine.
You know, Andreas, we're living for already a number of years with this conflict, but with the discussion on the peacekeepers, more or less, yeah, it had become serious around half a year ago. So can we really explain how the President Poroshenko could be perceived by the public of the Security Conference? Because, you know, we can always speak about the Ukrainian fatigue, but there are really people listening to that as all the same, or there is something new people would like to hear from Ukrainian side?
Well, I think most people acknowledge that Ukraine cannot do much here about the conflict situation. In fact, I think most Western observers, when they think about Ukraine, they think rather about the domestic issues that Ukraine has. I would also like to add to this presentation that, to my knowledge, the first comprehensive outline in English language was already published in 2014 by my colleague Andrei Novak in Nuremberg in Germany on the Eastern Europe platform of the Green Party, who for the first time outlined this idea of a UN peacekeeping operation and a temporary international administration for the currently occupied territories. There were also other people who were writing in between this period about this idea. So now we have this indeed as a serious topic since half a year, basically since Putin has brought up the topic of the UN, although his proposal was not accepted. And now people are basically waiting whether something may come out of these discussions. The key problem is that Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It has to give its agreement. And also there's the problem that Russia may, if they decide actually to give a green light to a real peacekeeping mission, that Russia may try to manipulate this peacekeeping mission in a way concerning the mandate, the composition of the peacekeeping force in a way that would perhaps then not be actually acceptable to Ukraine, which then would Ukraine perhaps put in a very difficult situation if Ukraine then rejects such a proposal from the UN Security Council.
I would like to read some, the summary, the most important, to outline the most important issues from the report which was done by Richard Govan. So it's about that a peacekeeping force will need a robust mandate and include 20,000 personnel. Non-NATO European countries like Sweden, Finland or Austria could play important roles. Also, it's said that the force would work as an enforcing mechanism to the Minsk Accord. Some political conditions alongside ceasefire would have to be fulfilled before its deployment, while others, notably local elections in the occupied regions, can only be delivered after full deployment. As well, there is the civilian component of the force will be critical to deal with law and order issues and potential local tensions. A 2,000, 4,000 strong police and civilian force will be needed to this end, with the EU potentially playing a key role in force generation, and a special representative should be appointed to lead and coordinate the process. So it looks like a reasonable thing, though there are a number of compromises, of course, and also if you look at that, how realistic is this offer? How close to what we can do, and are some kind of tricky compromises?
Well, I think it links actually up to another topic of this conference, which is the sanctions regime. And if the sanctions regime will be upheld, I think at one point Russia may agree to this, because if economic and social issues become salient enough in Russian domestic affairs, then I think we have a chance that actually Russia will try to find a way to get out of the Donbas, to get rid of the sanctions, and not to lose its face in all of this. And as a UN Security Council member, it could be sort of part of this whole thing and could present itself perhaps to the Russian population as a sort of initiator of this whole process. So this is a difficult thing to say, that what the chances are, because it basically depends on what the calculations, and I would say largely domestic calculations of the Kremlin are in terms of domestic affairs, how important economic issues will be in distinction to propaganda issues.
But at the same time, we should say that, of course, if non-NATO countries could serve, there are a lot of questions. As you know, of course, the Swedes or maybe Austrians, but at that time, it's really hard to imagine, you know, the Latin American troops or the representatives of Latin American countries come to the region of Donbas. So really, if you look in the details, you really understand how far is that from this stage. But I would like also to give a quote from the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sigmund Gabriel, who actually mentioned how the proposition on the peacekeepers could be connected to the sanctions.
Most of the representatives of the German economy here in this room know that I have a very clear position on this. My opinion is that we need to manage to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine and to get heavy weaponry out of the region. I found the Russian president's idea of securing the area using a UN Blue Helmets mission to be the right idea, and I am convinced that if we can manage it, we should start reducing sanctions against Russia step by step. I know that the official position on this is a different one. The official position says that only when the Minsk agreement has been implemented to 100% will the sanctions be completely lifted. I don't think that this is a realistic position. Rather, I think that if you want to make progress, then progress has to be felt by both sides. And it cannot be that we are only busy sticking to our demands rather than working on how to move towards the other party.
Andreas, what's new we can expect from Germany at this stage?
Well, this statement by Gabriel has been heavily criticized in Ukraine, but in fact it's not a new position by Germany. There was already last year, if not before, the idea that if there is real substantial and prolonged progress in the Donbas, then there could be a gradual softening of the sanctions, which is, as Minister Gabriel rightly said, actually in contradiction to the original position of the European Council on this from summer 2014, when the sanctions were introduced. And it was said that only after full implementation after full withdrawal, actually there were no Minsk agreements when the sanctions were introduced. That is also a slightly fuzzy issue here. So only when Russia would fully withdraw, then these sanctions would be lifted, all of the Donbas related sanctions. And now the proposal is here to have a gradual approach. Some improvement will be gratified, so to say, with some lifting of sanctions, and maybe that's also. I mean, it's criticized in Ukraine, but maybe it's in the interest of everybody to get gradually to a better situation.
But if to be very brief, what do we really expect from the German foreign policy, especially with still ongoing coalition talks?
Well, the coalition is not yet in place. The coalition talks have been finished. There's a coalition agreement, but the two parties, the main part or the three parties of the coalition, will have to agree. And the big question here is whether the Social Democrats will agree, because they will have, so to say, a referendum in their party on and all party members will be able to vote on this coalition agreement. But I think the chances are now that probably this coalition agreement will be approved by all relevant parties, and that we will have sooner or later a coalition. I would think by the end of March there should be a coalition.
And then probably would expect, I can't say that the German foreign policy isn't coherent, but then you can have more predictable, let's say, and more involved position after the inner issues are
Yeah, but the problem is not that salient in this case, because the old coalition is already the new coalition. So there might be changes in the personnel, but the parties in the coalition remain the same, and there will not be a large departure from the current position.
And the last quote we would like to present is by Kurt Volker, who is the US Special Representative on the Ukrainian negotiation. What's interesting is that he talked to Vladislav Surkov some weeks ago, and we wanted to hear his another public statement. He gives a feeling that nothing would happen before the Russian elections, but that's coming pretty soon. So let's hear to Mr. Volker.
Russia says that it cares about the people in eastern Ukraine, says that it wants to protect Russian-speaking people, says that is why it is supporting efforts there. Well, the best thing that we could do to protect people, to create security, to create peace, would be to have a UN-mandated peacekeeping force there that would effectively end the conflict and then create the space where the Minsk agreements could be fully implemented. Russia has produced a Ukraine that knows its own identity. Russia's produced a Ukraine that is more unified, more nationalist, more Western-oriented than ever before. And Russia is losing the goodwill of a younger generation in Ukraine. So Russia's intervention is producing the opposite of what Russia would actually want. So if we have, on the one hand, getting nothing out of this...
Are you suggesting that's true even in the Donbas?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. No, people don't like being ruled by thugs that they didn't choose. Anywhere in the world. So if you're not getting anything out of it, and if you're also paying a very high price, which is sanctions from the U.S., sanctions from the European Union, no effective U.S. relationship, no effective EU relationship, the cost of civil administration, the cost of the military conflict, casualties, general reputation for Russia in the world, the only benefit to this is for Putin domestically. Beyond that, it's a huge negative, and it doesn't produce any good.
So, Andreas, it's more or less the very same quote Kurt Volker keep saying for the last half a year. So really, as an analyst following that, what are the things you're following? What would be for you the sign that things are a bit moving? What are we expecting?
Well, I think the Western position is crucial here. The unity of the European Union, the coordination between the European Union and the US, how the whole US-Russia conflict around the intervention of Russia in the US election is playing out. In a very strange sense, I think Ukraine may be a beneficiary of this Russian intervention in the US election, because now many people in the US have become very upset with Russia, and oddly this is to the advantage perhaps of Ukraine.
Okay, so we'll follow. It's a long story. Andreas, thanks a lot. Andreas Umland is a German analyst based in Ukraine, and I'll be back in a second. Four years ago, Ukrainians took to the streets with the aim returning to the past towards European integration, ending police brutality and bureaucratic tyranny, and radically changing the system of power in some ways. Ukraine has come a long way since the 2014 Hromadske revolution. The old militia-style police was disbanded, and in its place reformed national police was established. Specialized anti-corruption bodies were set up, and reforms has followed in other sectors too, including healthcare and education. With regard to Ukraine's European aspiration, we finally saw the long-awaited ratification of the European Association Agreement, as well as the introduction of a visa-free travel regime with the European Union. But Ukraine is also a country at war. The active conflict against Russia-backed separatists in the occupied eastern territories of the country remains the top concern for many Ukrainians and continues to divide society. Moreover, progress has been slow in Ukraine. The lack of judicial reform, in fighting within the Ukraine's new anti-corruption agencies, and the struggling economic situation have only added to rising frustration within the Ukrainian society. So, what has really changed in the past 4 years? What changes does Ukrainian society now expect? And what are the issues that divide and unite Ukrainians? What is the current protest mood on the 4th anniversary of the Revolution of Dignity? We'll discuss that in our studio, but before that, let's have a look at our interview with Ella Libanova, the director of the Institute for Demography and Social Studies of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine.
We thought that people would come in, people who had absolutely no connection to other structures. Our Ukrainian. I'm not talking about abroad right now. People who did not own a business, who had no personal interests, would only be working on this, would only work for the benefit of Ukraine. At the same time, we expected them to be fantastically qualified, that they would come forward immediately, that all our wishes would instantly come true. Well, that most likely would not happen. Let's not forget that Crimea and Donbas also happened here. No one expected that. Everyone knew that there would be some tension within society. But they did not expect that we would have to relocate 1.5 million people, find refuge for them, find work for them, that it would all depend on the budget because there is no other source. And that we would have to rearm the army, and with that comes huge costs. That there would be support from Europe, but not how we expected it. We often hear that in order to maintain democracy and freedom, we need to make certain concessions, ban these, press on with that, make cuts here. A certain part of society think that and agree with that when the interests of the state are higher than the interests of the citizens. And because of this idea that there is a certain divide within society, some criticize others. But this is just inevitable in any society. Only in totalitarian societies is there no diversity in thought, discussions and other positions. Some people think that the most important thing is safety from all future disasters. I think that the gap is between those who want change and those who are afraid of it. Those who want change are prepared to make compromises, even in material sense. They understand that this is necessary. They want to direct their own efforts towards this. But those who don't want change just expect a positive trajectory of development, but they don't think about ways to ensure this. There are undoubtedly more people who do not want change. That's always been the case. And it's not just older people. There are a lot of people like this who are, let's say, 40 years old. They want to work, earn money, but they don't think about what needs to change within society. They want to keep the old rules of the game. We need to get to know one another. In all the polls, without exception, people say that Donbas worries them above all else. People who do not live there worry that their relatives will be mobilized. They are afraid. And that is a normal reaction. Every mother wants their son to live. The closer people are to the anti-terrorist operation zone, the stronger the opposition, and that is also understandable. I am absolutely convinced it will be 10 years before the military conflict ends and blood ceases to be spilled. For there to be a resolution, there needs to be understanding above all else. We don't want to listen to one another right now, but we must do this. We live in one country. It's the attempts to impose their own supremacy that concern me the most.
We're happy to discuss the Ukrainians, if the Ukrainians are ready to protest, with Liana Novikova, who is a junior research analyst at Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, and Pavlo Burkovsky, who is a political analyst at Democratic Initiative Foundations. Thanks for coming. And before we start, I would like to ask to present the graph, because while we are speaking, that according to the data from surveys carried by your institutions, Institute of Sociology, 40% of adult residents of Ukraine were willing to take part in protest actions. Compared to previous year, the level of protest readiness rose from 43 to 49. And it's probably shrank a bit, but can you explain us? So how willing are Ukrainians to protest and why?
Okay, so as we see, there is an increase and after that a decline in readiness to protest, and it is mainly due to the readiness to participate in electoral campaign, to vote, and you know, in 2016, this increase was due to some discussion about early parliamentary elections. There was a massively discussion about this possibility, but however, there was no parliamentary election, and the issue was silent. And as a result, we can see that this level of readiness to protest has decreased. But and at the same time, during 2016 and 2017, less and less people are ready to protest in such way as authorized rallies and demonstrations. Less and less people.
Petro, so what are the concerns of the Ukrainians, and also how would you describe that? Because recently there was a number of even the American publication were kind of speaking that, you know, Ukrainians are on the edge of another riot, but how true is that?
So if you mentioned Americans, let me recall the issue that was discussed in a Washington Post in 2016 on the eve of the presidential elections. They said that there are three hottest issues in American politics. It's guns, race, and religion. Speaking about Ukraine, I also could say that there are three hottest issues for Ukrainians. This is social injustice, impunity of politicians, and the Russian threat. So these are three main concerns that could mobilize people on the streets, and that could trigger massive protest, but at the same time these issues could trigger a massive mobilization, a positive mobilization, like one that we had experienced in 2014, when a lot of people took part in voluntary battalions, in volunteer work, in helping the state to cope with all of these threats.
I would like also to bring another graph where it explains what kind of the political participation people are ready to undergo. So it's about the election campaign. Yeah, it's collect signatures. There are authorized rallies, but it's rather a small figure. So can you comment?
Yes, and as I said, this choice of authorized rallies and demonstrations has decreased during past 2 years, and you know, people are quite tired, and also there are very low level of trust to the parliament and to the president in society. It's quite impossible that without some trigger there will be
a big trigger,
yes,
like
big
really
trigger
significant
and massive potential impulse. There was hardly possible new protest, new big rally or new revolution.
Would you agree on that? And also, you see that we discussed that the economic situation is not that good, and all other research shows that people are pretty feel insecure because of the inflation and the other issue. Also, you know, from time to time we hear the news. There are every Sunday there is a protest. There are the issues connected to, like for instance, anything connected to Mrs. Saakashvili. So our foreign partners are always looking and saying, like, is it serious? Is it serious? How big is that?
You know, the figures, if you speak about public opinion, figures could be deceptive. So if you just return back to the previous slide, and you will see that the number of the people of the protest sentiments, the figure of the protest sentiments was quite low in September 2013. It was just 2 months before the beginning of the Euromaidan. So it's impossible with the simple, KIS, the Kyiv Institute for International Sociology, is very nice and authoritative institution. But still, if we speak about omnibus polls, it's very hard to detect really very interesting trends. You know, when it's just a general picture. If you want to know exactly where the society are moving, whether it's beginning to stop tolerating social injustice or impunity or Russian threat, you should make more specialized public opinion polls. If we speak about these digits, I would say that actually there is no sense to worry about. So yes, protest sentiments are quite high, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we are on the edge of some major disruption.
Where are the place for anti-corruption? And to what extent this is the trigger? And they know, like, what the people mean by that.
Corruption is, of course, a main problem and main issue which is discussed and which is very worry many people. But we live with that. People live with that, and maybe it's not enough for us to protest against corruption in such ways. Maybe people tend to believe that some peaceful ways of protest will be useful against corruption. Not such ways as, for example, rallies and demonstrations.
If you allow me to just say a few words. So in my opinion, corruption is the issue where the social injustice meets the impunity of politicians. So it's, I would say, it's like a Molotov cocktail, and if it really starts stirring, we would can see the people who would throw the real Molotov cocktails at the buildings of politicians who are involved in corruption. And there is also a threat that we have a lot of people who participated in a military conflict, and they also, these people have very sharp sense of injustice, and they really have a resentment towards the people whom they protected and who really did not do what they have to do. They had to change the country, and they didn't, meet their commitments.
So, in fact, that is a huge concern always, because these kind of people, especially, you know, the veterans, the people who used to fight, they're extremely vocal, and maybe, you know, it's not that representative compared to the major part of the society. So I don't really see, you know, that they would see they create an armed force. There are very little people, not somebody significant who would be ready to protest with using the weapon. Is it?
Yes.
Is this question asked? And you know, what are the figures on that? If you speak about or just people very cautious about speaking that way.
As I know, our institute didn't ask respondents direct questions about weapons. It's so discuss if we should ask. But you know, this question is now more and more discussed in mass media and in the society. Maybe it would be useful for sociologists and for society to ask about it.
And I would have the same question, but also following on that we would have the presidential election in a year. So is it the case that in that period of time, you know, the people are not going to do something significant because they know that they would have their say rather soon?
You know, if you look at the Ukrainians and how they behave on the EU elections, actually, our nation is very responsible. So if there is a chance, if the people believe that elections would be free and fair, they would rather take ballots, not arms. But if there is a threat that the vote will be, fixed, then people could start thinking about other ways to protect their right to democracy.
Thanks a lot. That were two brilliant Ukrainian sociologists, Liana Novikova from the Kyiv Institute of Sociology and Petro Poroshenko, who is the political analyst at Democratic Initiatives Foundation. And following the story, we also would like to say that 4 years ago, we're speaking about a person who was among the protesters, an activist beaten by the Berkut Ukraine's riot police. But later, however, Serhiy Romanov joined the reformed National Police, and in particular, the riot police unit responsible for maintaining order during mass protests. Hromadske managed to spend time with his unit and see how their work differs from that of the old Berkut police.
Не розриваємося, стаємо цепью, пацани.
Now we're going to dress up warm like a cabbage because it will be a bit cold. It's nothing, we'll cope.
This is Serhiy Romanov. By education, he's a research engineer in applied physics. He was part of the first group of the patrol police's new recruits. This year, Serhei became the commander of a tactical unit. This battalion provides tactical operational response. It is a new subdivision of the patrol police, which works to uphold public order during mass events.
That's it. Here we go.
Are you ready?
Yes. To me, working in the police is a real chance to do something. It's not just standing at the side waving your finger and saying, you should do this. It's going there trying to do something with your own hands.
Да. Чи повіджимаємось?
Ні. То вже лишнє, поняв, віджимаємо.
Алло, Слава, а хто там старший буде? Я понял, ми все, плюс прийняв.
What are our tasks? We've come here today and our job is to be present.
Ефект присутності. Скільки у нас уже цей мітинг
Since this protest has dragged on, it's impossible for us to constantly have thousands stationed here.
Немає можливості, але і залишити його.
We also cannot leave it unattended, because that will lead to its spreading.
Він буде розповсюджуватися. Вони як, знаєш,
You know, they're like gas. Gas will take up any free space. How many spaces, how many tents will they put up? There's a simple difference when you're at a funded protest and a protest where there is enthusiasm, support from the people. These are two different things. And so far, for example, if the Yanukovych scenario repeats itself, when the students gather, the war starts, and our current leadership says, we're cutting our ties with the West again and moving towards the East, well, that could be the reason for another popular uprising. I would then fill out the form and leave the police.
Serhei was an active participant of the Euromaidan revolution. He was beaten by the Berkut officers during a confrontation on Hromadske Street. The tactical unit now works alongside the Special Operations Regiment of the Kiev Police, particularly during mass events. This regiment was created on the basis of the dissolved Berkut.
We clashed with former Berkut officers here outside the Parliament building. We talked. They asked, well, what did Maidan do for you? I said it gives us a national consciousness. People started to think. They have their point of view. I have mine. I'm not going to impose that on anyone. If people need to understand, then they will come to that conclusion themselves.
Serhei joined the police in a wave of enthusiasm. However, after 3 years, some of the officers from the first intake became disappointed with the reform and left.
Have you ever wanted to leave?
I never had a strong desire to leave, but a few times I had such thoughts. You're constantly overworked. That's why you get vacations. But over a period of time, if you don't get a vacation for a year, it will all build up and you can just break down emotionally. And it will show. At such times you hit the ceiling, but then you sleep on it, think it through, and you're practically ready to work again.
On October 21st, there was a fight between the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists Battalion Chief Mykola Kochanivsky and the former commander of the far-right group Right Sector, Ruslan Kachmala in Kiev. Kochanivsky then ran after his opponents with a non-lethal pistol. Serhei was off duty that day. He was drinking coffee in a nearby cafe when he heard the shots.
I ran to the first guy. They said that someone had attacked them. I ran and detained him. While they were taking him away, another one ran over with a weapon. I lunged at that one with the gun and took him down. The one who detained the first guy helped me hold him. We called the patrol police. The guys arrived and they separated us. From Institutska Street to Европейska Square, preventative function as per usual. We just observe. We can go into the tents, but we don't take them down. We'll swap in an hour. If some kind of disturbance starts, we just move in columns between the two groups and divide them. If a fight erupts, we'll just hold them back. We won't beat them. We will only use force if force is used against us.
тоді, коли до нас застосують силу.
Were you beaten with nightsticks on Maidan?
Yes, over there near the Hotel Dnipro. I had 8 stitches. It even left a scar. That's where they stitched me up, in the trade unions building on the 3rd floor. That was on January 23rd, 2014. There was a team who, quote-unquote, dispersed the crowd using any method, and these methods led to that situation. There were many wounded people, many beaten up, many people arrested.
Т4 строїмося біля спринтера в темпі. Раз, два, раз, два. Праворуч.
Давай, вище, 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 да, отак.
Сира погода, горіти не хоче.
Героям слава! Героям слава!
Who's the occupier? Are you the occupier? You work for Russia. Separatists.
Це життя. Це життя, да. Тут спокійно, стандартно.
Standard calm situation.
You're already used to this?
Yes, we're guarding the crowd. It's fine. If no one smashes anything, that will be great.
Не буде, взагалі буде супер. Пацани, хтось буде пробувати бити, затягуйте сюди, затримуємо.
Левый фланг заводи туда, в сторону вправо, да, давай, пошли.
Ташка, ліве плече вперед. Вліво, вліво, зміщаємося, вліво, зміщаємося.
Давайте пробежимся.
Вперед, бігом!
Не затримуй.
Не за...
Що це таке за напад?
Назад відходь. Рух. Сам колись їхав.
There was a time when I was riding the metro at Hromadske. I got on the escalator and shouted, "Glory to Ukraine!" And someone shouted back to me, "Glory to the heroes!" It really moved me. But now they've made it into a football chant. It's a bit unpleasant that such nice words are being used this way.
В таких цілях такі гарні слова.
And the full story is on our webpage. Also sign up for our brand new newsletter if you would like to receive Hromadske International weekly highlights. I would remind it's en.hromadske.ua. The sign-up box is on the upper right-hand side of the webpage. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Search Hromadske International. We are there 24/7 for you with more stories and more reports, and I'll be back in a second. From 2013 to 2015, Bruno Macaes served as Portugal's Secretary of State for European Affairs. Then, after leaving the government, he took a 6-month trip, meandering across the borderlands between Europe and Asia by train and car, but never plane. Those travels became the genesis of his new book, The Dawn of Eurasia, published last month. And in the book, Macaes argues that the most important geopolitical trend today is the growing integration of Europe and Asia. But If Mikhail's thesis is correct, what does that mean for Ukraine, a country on the European frontier that is internally moving towards Europe? My colleague Tetiana Harkova sat down with Mikhail today. He is in Ukraine to learn more about his views and what Ukraine should expect.
I think for the next decade, we're going to see a certain coming together of China and Russia, simply because they both consider their main enemy to be the West. In the future, there's quite a lot of place for rivalry between China and Russia, especially in Central Asia, perhaps even in Ukraine, where China is becoming more influential every year. But for the time being, the feeling in Moscow and Beijing is that the main adversary is Europe and America. And that brings them together. That's also what happened after Ukraine. It was very clear that Russia moved away from Europe. The sanctions was pushing Russia away, and they turned to China to some extent. But of course, China has plans to really have hegemony over Central Asia and even over Russia. So I think in time Russia will realize that China is also a threat. But for the time being, if you talk to people in Moscow, they see the threat coming from the West, not from the East.
At the same time, China is the second world power. I mean, in terms of GDP, for example, it's compared to United States. And we are also following what's happening between the United States and China. A lot of tensions have place now. Do you think that what could be the possible development of this relationship, which is not easy one?
It's going to get worse. I think people in the United States, decision makers, realized finally that China is not becoming more Western, is not converging towards a Western model. It's going in a different direction. And for the past 20 years, there was this illusion that China would first open up economically, then they would open up politically, and by the end, they would be a Western liberal country. Now, no one believes this anymore. And so there is a certain feeling of competition and threat coming from China. Last year, I think, was marked by this. Not only in the United States, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Europe, in Germany, the opinion about China changed. It's now, there's a certain feeling of being threatened by China that didn't exist before. But let me say that for a country like Ukraine, China offers an opportunity to balance Russian power. It's happening in Kazakhstan, it's happening in Georgia. Countries like Kazakhstan and Georgia, they feel a certain danger coming from Russia, and they use China to balance. And eventually, I suspect that Ukraine will also find this an attractive idea. It's a way to block Russian power, to bring in Chinese investment, for example.
What I also find quite surprising in your book is that you are talking about China, and we do understand the real dangers, the real challenges, and maybe opportunities of China as a country, as a power. But at the same time, you talk as much about Russia as about China. And if you look at Russia, its GDP now, it's like, it could be compared to GDP of Italy, of one, not the most rich, the richest country in European Union. Do you think that there's a kind of exaggeration of this alternative model Russia is suggesting, is proposing to, economically speaking, but also socially speaking?
Yes, I get this question a lot, whether I give too much respect to Russia, whether I don't see that Russia is really decaying very fast. I think Russia still has enormous resources, natural resources, the territory, and also the political resources, the strength of the Russian state. You feel it here. It is a political project that has lasted 500 years of increasing state strength and an empire that works and has kept control over all this territory. So I think you should not dismiss Russia. It is a fully modernized country with highly educated at least a big part of the population, highly educated. I think they have reached a dead end with Putin. With Putin, you can no longer expect anything. No reforms, nothing, but just the status quo. But maybe after Putin, we will watch a different kind of Russia. And if you take the example of Syria, for example, where clearly they were able to outmaneuver and to outplay the United States, even though their defense budget is a fraction, their GDP is the size of Italy, but still they have this ability to project power, which I think you feel in Ukraine, and now we've seen it in Syria. So it would be a mistake to dismiss or to ignore Russia. When Obama said they are just a regional power, I think this is a mistake. We have to take Russia seriously.
You can see this man in the picture, Datovanishvili. He's an ordinary man from an ordinary village in Georgia's South Ossetia region. But he has also met numerous European leaders and officials, all of whom come to visit him at his farm. That's because Russia has occupied South Ossetia for the past decade. 6 years ago, the Russian Ossetian authorities erected a barbed wire fence in the village of Hromadske. While most locals live on the Georgian side, Vanishvili and his family remain the village's only inhabitants on the Ossetian side of the fence. Their predicament is a clear testament to the conflict that has divided the region. My colleague from Hromadske had traveled there to speak to Vanishvili about his life and family behind barbed wire.
Presidents, prime ministers arrive, then they leave. Have you ever had problems because of this?
When they come, I'm very happy, and when they leave, my heart aches.
Ever thought of moving to the Georgian side?
For 80 years, I've been living in Georgia. How could I become a Russian citizen?
Does the wire get in your way?
Yes, I had land there. Now I can't sow there. I do not have any Russian money. How do I buy bread? The Russian side does not give me a pension, does not provide any help or food, doesn't give me anything. My land is over there, and I want to farm on that land. Who do I leave this house to? They destroyed everything here. They said, if you want to join us, get out of there. How is this humane, I ask you?
Your wife is coming.
They were looking at me just like you. The Russians said that I need to take her to the hospital in Leningori. Neither the one in Gori nor in Tbilisi permitted me to.
What about doctors? Do they go through the wire?
They just looked, said, do you need to go to the hospital in Gori?
How does this affect your life? People come, say hello, leave, and you remain here. Do you have any problems because of this?
They will remove this border soon.
Who says this?
Poroshenko also says this.
Are you sad that you are the only ones who have remained here? Everyone else is living on the other side in Georgia.
It is sad. I do not know. I'm 28 years old. I'm single. I want to get married.
And to marry, is it necessary for your wife to be from this side? Or is this also not a problem?
My grandmother, grandfather are here. Who would I leave them with?
We wish you good health and a long life. Thank you.
We filmed that incredible report as this is the part of our series. You can find a part of our special project at our webpage en.hromadske.ua. It's called The Life Through Barbed Wire, the Georgia-South Ossetia demarcation line. There you can read and look at the other stories of the people on this part of the conflict zone in Georgia. This is not just the one story, so there you can go and explore it. And of course, we're doing that stories also because Eastern Donbas sits among a number of occupied regions isolated from the world as a consequence of Russian meddling. But what can we learn from regions such as Transnistria, which broke off from Moldova more than 20 years ago, and South Ossetia, which has been occupied by Russian forces for a decade? So we also had spoken to Nicu Popescu, senior analyst at the EU Institute for Security Studies, about what Ukraine can take away from these conflicts.
Well, yeah, I think frozen conflicts are often, given the constraints we have, are a reasonably good scenario. It's better to have a frozen conflict like Transnistria than an unfrozen or unfreezing one like Nagorno-Karabakh or South Ossetia in 2008. And for that you need a number of things. First, you need strong international peacekeepers, not like in South Ossetia where the peacekeeping force was consisting of locals and Russians, and they could not prevent and did not prevent the escalation of war. So it's really useful if you have a strong international peacekeeping force that is really keeping the sides from fighting. No matter what your instinct or who you blame, it's always better if you have a strong international peacekeeping force. At the same time, another lesson that one might learn is that a lot has been tried in attempts to reintegrate South Ossetia or Transnistria throughout the 90s and 2000s. But there's also a danger that reintegration that is not done well could wreck entire states. What do I mean by this is that if you decentralize power so much, and if you give very often, and that was Moldova and Georgia's dilemmas very often, they almost, there were many times when Georgia and Moldova could have reintegrated their countries, but they should have given so much influence to the separatist entities in their own capital that they might have given up on, an independent foreign policy, on the capacity to ratify, IMF funds, World Bank funds, association agreements. And, I don't think this might have necessarily stabilized these countries. So having frozen conflict is bad, but it's even worse if you have, large dysfunctional entities. We live in an imperfect world, and if I look at Ukraine, it would be good if Donbas is solved, but if we ever arrive to a situation where it's solved, the important thing is not to destabilize the Ukraine by making it hostage through legal or constitutional constraints to what is a small part of Ukraine. And what you want is that, for all the tragedy of what happened, you don't want to make hostage another 40 million people to the geopolitics of Donbas region.
Thank you for watching from the entire team of Hromadske International. We are here to explain Ukraine and Eastern Europe for you. And please, I will remind, go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua. There is always a new story for you. And follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Search for Hromadske International. It's always updated. Thank you again and goodbye.